For our daily cancellation, we're going to cancel the New York Times for a lengthy article, quite lengthy. It must be 8,000 words or more, just published yesterday. Here's the headline. Convicted of sex crimes, but with no victims. An online sting operation to catch child predators snared hundreds of men, but what were they really guilty of? Now, if you think that those of us who warn of the normalization of pedophilia and the sexualization of children are suffering from paranoid delusions, you should really pay attention here. The article talks about sting operations conducted by law enforcement to catch sex predators. And it focuses especially on Operation Net Nanny, which is the initiative in Washington state where sex predators are lured to a house to catch a predator style and arrested, although it's not on TV. This is all just a law enforcement operation. But it's quite clear that the writer of this article, Michael Winterip, wants us to feel sorry for these men who get caught. And he appears to see this tactic of trapping potential sex predators as unjust and unfair, and we should pity them for it. I will say that throughout the article, he does raise a few interesting points. One thing that he dwells on is the fact that in many cases, men who actually molest and rape children get lighter sentences than men who get caught up trying to molest kids in these sting operations. And I would agree that men who actually molest kids should get longer sentences in the same way that a murderer should get a longer sentence than an attempted murderer, right? But the answer, in my opinion, is extending the sentences for the child rapists, not shortening the sentences for the attempted child rapists. So an example that he gives is of a man who raped a 13-year-old repeatedly over the course of a year, admitted to molesting two of his siblings also, but his sentence was a minimum of 7 years. Meanwhile, another man who got caught in a sting operation trying to meet with an 11-year-old for sex got a minimum of 10 years. Now, yes, that's absurd. The rapist ought to have gotten more than 7 years. How about 70 years instead? I don't think child rapists should ever see the outside of a prison ever again. But a guy who tries to meet an 11-year-old for sex, even if there is no 11-year-old because it was an undercover cop the whole time, is undoubtedly a threat to society and should consider himself lucky to only get 10 years in prison for that. So this is the way the article is kind of set up. And it starts right off the bat giving us an extremely sympathetic portrait of a man who wanted to rape a 13-year-old girl. Here's the picture of the man along with his mother. So I think that gives you a pretty good idea of how the New York Times wants us to view this guy. And let me read a little bit of this to you. Okay, it says, Jace Hembrick worked as an apprentice laborer during the weeks, renovating homes around Vancouver, Washington, and at neighborhood gas stations on weekends. Much of the rest of his life was online. He was hardcore, amassing a collection of more than 200 games. People told him it wasn't smart to be so cut off from reality, but his internet life felt rich. As a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons, he controlled other players' destinies. As a video warrior, he was known online by his nickname and was constantly messaging fellow gamers, particularly his best friend Simon. Though the two had never met in person, over the last few years they paired up as teammates playing Rainbow Six Siege and Rocket League and grew close. This is all crucial information that we need about this guy. At 20, Hambrick was still living at home with his mother, big surprise there, to save money for college, where he hoped to study game design. He was a voracious reader who could knock off a 1,000-page fantasy novel in 2 days, blah, 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 etc., giving us his whole life story. And then finally, one Friday after work in February 2017, Hambrick came across a Casual Encounters W4M Women Searching for Men post that seemed meant for him. Just gamer girl sitting home on Sunday, it read. We can chat as long as I'm not leveling. I don't even know what that means. As long as I'm not leveling. Hambrick emailed back, sounds like fun. What game you playing? I am hooked on Alien Isolation, gamer girl replied. Forget sex, Hambrick wrote. Let me come watch. I haven't gotten that one yet, adding that he was 20. 15 minutes later, gamer girl replied that she was 13. Hambrick was confused. Why did you post an ad on Craigslist if you're 13? You mean 23? She asked for his cell phone number and they switched to texting, exchanging photos. Gamer girl was beautiful, he thought. If he wasn't being pranked, big eyes, cute white cap, soft smile, gazing up at the camera serenely with a really nice set of headphones. They exchanged a few texts about sex. I can be real bad if you're into bondage, he typed. But he was already hoping for more than just sex. I don't get out much, he texted. I feel like if we get to talking, it might go somewhere. You're beautiful and a gamer. I might have no problem hanging out with you. That's cool, gamer girl replied. And then it gets into even more graphic stuff with the guy talking about what he wants to do to her sexually. That is to a girl who told him that she's 13. Now, back to the article. It says, was this an elaborate game? Again, she claimed to be 13. The photo seemed to tell a different story, and the gaming chair she was seated in looked too expensive for a kid. Parents could have bought it, She used slang a 13-year-old probably wouldn't know, like FTP, it means F the police, that originated in 80s hip-hop. Oh yeah, I'm sure there's no 13-year-olds that know that. The vulgarities and snide tone seemed too adult. Her texts were full of LOLs. Was she an immature teenager or a sly adult? Her driving directions seemed too specific for 13. Hainberg texted that he would be driving a red Prius, his mother's, and Gamer Girl replied that she would be wearing a gray sweatshirt and ripped jeans. It was a 20-minute drive to the house. After stopping for condoms, he arrived at 7 p.m., 3.5 hours after their first email. She came to the door just as she'd said, in torn jeans and sweatshirt, and then it goes on, and then he goes inside, and that's when Chris Hansen shows up, or whoever's standing in for Chris Hansen. The cops come out and all of that, and they live happily ever after, or the rest of us do. And he went to prison, as he should. And the New York Times wants us to feel badly about that, because after all, he was never actually talking to a 13-year-old, and he didn't think that she looked 13, and she knew how to give driving directions. What 13-year-old can do that? And she uses LOL. Apparently 13-year-olds don't do that. Of course, none of this makes any sense. She told you she was 13. What, you thought this was a grown woman pretending to be 13? And thus trying to attract child rapists? Because she's into that sort of thing? Now, I'm sure there are freaks out there in the slimy dregs of cyberspace who are into that, but that excuse just doesn't cut it, and shouldn't. A girl told you she was 13. You came over to have sex with her. End of story. Goodbye. Enjoy prison. The article makes much of the fact that these guys who get caught in these stings aren't really soliciting minors for sex because they're actually talking to undercover cops. It also tells us that a lot of the predators don't have a criminal history, and many of them don't have child porn on their computers. We're supposed to be impressed by that, apparently. And then it sort of skims over other things that seem relevant, like the fact that half of the men caught in this Washington sting operation were trying to meet children 11 years old and younger, which makes them pedophiles by definition. Now, yes, there can be gray areas when it comes to who ends up on the sex offender registry. You hear about cases, for example, of, say, an 18-year-old in a relationship with someone a few years younger than him, ending up on the registry, even though they're so close in age they could have gone to high school together. Now, that is unjust, I think most of us can agree, and wrong. But that's not what we're talking about here. A 20-year-old and a 13-year-old, no gray area, no mitigating circumstances. Grown men looking to meet 11-year-olds, no gray area. These are sex predators, plain and simple. What about using these sting operations to catch them? Well, is there something unfair about that? Does it matter that they aren't actually chatting with a real child? No, and no. First of all, if you're told that she's 13, you're perfectly free and able to say, oh, never mind, you shouldn't be on this site, kid. Go tell your parents, and walk away. There's no entrapment here because you aren't being trapped at all. You're not backed into a corner. You can walk away. Second, catching predators and enforcing the law against child molestation and rape and sex crimes, that's very difficult. These are not easy laws to enforce. Precisely the problem here is that so often the laws are enforced retroactively and after the crime has been committed. But then in that case, the damage has already been done to the child. So now we're punishing a predator and protecting the next victim, but it's too late to protect the first victim. So law enforcement tries to devise ways to protect even the first victim, to smoke these guys out and get them behind bars before they're able to successfully hurt a child. This isn't pre-crime like the Minority Report. You are catching people who are actively trying to commit a crime. It's just that they're trying to commit it in, you might say, a controlled environment. It's no different than a woman who gets a murder charge for trying to hire an undercover cop to kill her husband. The point, obviously, is that if the undercover cop hadn't been there, she would have hired a real hitman, and then we'd be arresting her after the poor sap she's married to is already 6 feet under. So, what's going on here? Of all the problems in the world, of all the injustices to expose, Why are we getting a novel-length article telling us about the trials and tribulations of men who tried to have sex with pubescent or prepubescent children? Well, it goes back to what we said at the top. There is, in my estimation, a noticeable effort underway in our culture to normalize pedophilia and sexualize children, and to paint the men who prey upon children as victims of an overzealous and prudish system. This is just another example of that, of many. And the examples are only increasing. And that is why, with great vengeance, we must cancel the New York Times again. Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Wire, one of the fastest growing conservative outlets in the entire country. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and then subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of our content.